So welcome everybody to the hybrid working strategy webinar. Um, my name is Stephanie Heider. I am the founder and CEO of Bridging Distance. I have with me my colleague Janet Swaysland, who is a senior consultant, has also her own firm, and really specializes in culture engagement. And we've been working together for several years now. And then also here is Matthew Rosenfield, who is recently joining Bridging Distance, and we're happy to have him in terms of a consultant as well as a business development role. So I don't know, you guys want to take a few seconds to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Well, as Stephanie says, I work with companies in kind of an overlapping area with Stephanie, especially these days where culture needs to evolve from what people used to count on as a physical environment a lot of times. And so how do you translate a culture and make sure that it's helping you move through these transitions, and how do you keep the communication connections with employees when it's harder than ever? Real quick, Stephanie, people are having trouble hearing you, just you.
Just me, huh? Okay, let me see if
I hear you pretty well, but
How about me? Can you hear me at the moment, Janet?
yes, I hear you fine.
I'll do my intro while Steph tries to figure it out.
Sure.
Good morning, everyone. Matt Rosenfield here, also formerly of Cheshire, Connecticut. Thank you, Lee. I have been an HR person for about the last dozen years, working over about 16 years at IBM, and more recently working with Stephanie and a number of other small businesses trying to grow their businesses and work their way into or more deeply into some of the HR space, given all my background. So I actually met Stephanie through the Boston HR Council, and the material that she was reviewing with us there just resonated for me. And so I reached out and we connected, and we've been working together the last few months because it just makes sense. And I hope you'll find that this is both relevant and timely, but a kind of no-brainer for you, because it certainly is for me.
All right, is this better? Can you hear me better now?
I can.
Yes, maybe for the audience, if you can hear me better, just let people know.
Just type in, or it's soft. Evidently it's soft, but yes.
Okay, let's see if this is better. I'll turn it up. How's that? Is that any better? Huh, weird.
Some can hear, it varies, which is very weird.
I know.
But most are saying a little bit better.
Okay, all right. Please.
And you know, you guys try turning up your volume. That's working for some people.
Okay, yeah, sorry about this. I've not had this happen before, so always a new experience. So again, for people who this is your first time interacting with Bridging Distance, welcome to our fold and our adoring fans. This tells you a little bit about our history. We are in our 25th year, our 25th anniversary now. Starting in 1996, I did my master's thesis on trust in global teams, and since that time have been researching and pioneering different aspects of virtual and remote work. So with that, let's get started. So our agenda for the next bit of time is to look at this idea of defining what hybrid is, looking at three factors that help in terms of overcoming some of the challenges of hybrid, and then some solutions in terms of some foundation for our strategy, again, based on the research that we do, and we'll share that. And then kind of finish in terms of looking at what is really the payoff to a smart hybrid strategy, and then hopefully have time for questions and comments in the end. So again, that's what we're looking forward to. And so again, Matt and Janet and I will be monitoring the chat, so feel free to use that as well. But let's just talk about in terms of where we are now. The world's what we've been talking about is the world's largest work from home experiment that started in March of 2020 is well into this next phase. And so people have been talking about hybrid for quite a while now. So we wanted to hear a little bit from you. And so I'd like you to, I'm going to pop up a poll, but tell us, where are you working from these days? Are you full-time at home? Are you full-time in a company office building? Are you sort of part-time home and part-time office, or other mixed office situation? And feel free, if you're in one that's maybe part-time or other mixed, feel free to put what that configuration is into the chat, because that's really helpful for us throughout this webinar, but also as we continue to explore and research and experience helping people in terms of these challenges. So almost done. We have a couple more people. A couple more people maybe. Let's see. So let's end this in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. A couple stragglers came in. Okay. Let me share the results. So we have,
Yeah.
wow. Can you all see this? Yes. It is full-time working at home, 17, full-time in an office building, only 2. Wow. And then part-time home, part-time office is 13, and other mixed. So any comments in the chat, Janet or Matt, about what those office configurations are?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm seeing is that things are shifting. You know, sometimes I'm this, sometimes I'm that. And I think that's a hallmark of what we're going through, because, you know, the conditions are changing, right? So go into office as needed, 3 days a week in office, rest of the week at home. Go to the office for just major meetings. That purpose orientation, like, is there an actual reason to be in a physical office?
Yeah.
Only in office when needed. Yeah. And then so yeah, there's a mix, and it's and then, oh, by the way, I'm seeing people who are have mobile offices. They're in camper vans. They are so
That's my favorite. I love that, because they can work from anywhere, right? So it's
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right, great. So that gives us some context, which is just really helpful for us. Okay, Janet?
Yeah, and so, you know, when we talk about hybrid has become quite the buzzword, and I don't mean a car, of course. And everybody's talking about it. What we've seen in this whole shift to rapid remote work is a lot of people who are making a lot of assumptions. And this is easy for me to say because I'm not Stephanie, but Stephanie has actually studied this for a long time. And so what's really important is to look at, well, why do some of these things matter? Why are certain things more predictably effective and successful than others? And, you know, so, you know, in hybrid, where we saw this mix of situations, just as you all reported, you have this mix of digital and physical. You have this mix of technology and just face to face in real life. You have this blend where everybody is not working the same way, and that creates a lot of complexity with some implications to be aware of. But the good news is there's stuff you can do about it.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and I think it's you know, as Janet said, for some people it's really new, and it's fairly, you know, foreign for many people. But for others who have been working remotely, in a lot of ways, those folks have been sort of the tutors and the teachers over this number of times, and lots of those folks have also reached out. So really, through all that, the question really is, you know, what do we do about it? And how do we manage that? And so what we look at here are 3 critical factors, 3 factors that are critical to looking at how to make this work. We're looking at location types, and I'll share more about that in a minute, and as well as how people work together. So what we call the need for team-based work or interdependency, or how much cooperation, how much exchange do they need? And then from that, what are the leadership expectations, both as leaders, as individuals, and from leadership from above, in terms of what the leadership strategy is? And that strategy is a lot of what we're going to be focusing on here. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what these location types are. So what we're calling the workplace location complexity is this continuum. And way back when, even before, 25 years ago, um, we had this idea of one building. So you had a building in Post Office Square in Boston, or in downtown Houston, or in LA, or in Frankfurt, and all the employees would commute to that shared office building, and then they would start in the morning and end in the evening, and then come home. Then we moved into kind of globalization, where you have multiple buildings, maybe in the same city, in the same state, same country, different countries, all kinds of reasons. And so all employees are still commuting to a company building, but there's more than one. But all employees commute to one of many of those buildings. Then we move into this. So I'm going to date myself when I talk about this 15 years ago, 20 years ago. We used to call it telecommuters or teleworkers a long time ago, when remote was not even a term that related to this. And so we had some employees commuting to a company building, while some employees were working all or part-time from home. And even if it was just because the cable guy was coming, or you had a doctor's appointment or something. So there was this kind of situations where people were working. And then more recently, so by recently, I mean the last 10 years or so, we had a situation of co-working spaces, like third places like WeWork or WorkBar, or some of these other aspects to it. And in that case, some of these people would be doing that. And what we're actually also seeing in COVID is that people who are not going into a larger office, either because of quotas or because they don't want to, are still using some of those third party office spaces, those co-working spaces, to be able to socially distance and still have face-to-face interactions with some colleagues in ways that they can still keep safe. And so we're seeing different ways in terms of that morphing. And then all the way to really what we saw in March and April, and continues in a lot of ways, and that is all or most employees working full-time or all of their hours. We'll talk more about that in terms of some of those shifts from a home office, often with spouses and partners and children and dogs and pets. And so for people who have been part of the Bridging Distance Fold, you've probably seen cats walking across my computer screen, or some of the other visitors that come. So that's the first complexity, right? The first way in which we think about it. The second one is the degree of team-based work. So how much interdependency do we need? And in this case, we're looking at going from cooperation, where independent people or groups share information to support each other's goals, right? So you're talking about sometimes this might be a committee or an initiative where it's not part of your direct team or your direct performance, but it's still, you have to work with other people. That's cooperation. And then you move up in terms of more team-based work to something called coordination. And in coordination, you're looking at independent people or groups. Again, they have to align activities. So not just share information, but they have to align in some ways and coordinate their efforts, but again, to support each other's goals. All the way moving up to this idea of collaboration, which is these independent people or groups have to actively work together to realize a shared goal. And so we talk about that in terms of collaboration, which is, in some ways, it's like hybrid right now. Collaboration has always been a buzzword that lots of people use. But in that collaboration, you have a higher level of interdependency. And so what you have in that is an increased need for engagement, commitment, belonging, ability to add value, and just a general need to know stuff. So those are the two dimensions to start with. And for this, we're looking at it in terms of a continuum. And in this continuum, we have across that bottom, one building all the way to all people working remotely on the horizontal axis. And then on the vertical, we have that cooperation and increased interdependency all the way up to collaboration on the top. So what I'd like you to do is take out a piece of paper, and then I'd like to kind of draw this axis. You don't have to put in the words if you don't want to, but certainly you're welcome to. And then put a dot on the part of the page where you and or your team are at right now. So if it is a team where you have kind of shared goal or goals, and most or all of you are working from home, you might be at 5 on the team-based work, and maybe a 4.5, especially if you're an engineer or a scientist, and you could split things like that. So maybe it's sort of like that. So take a minute and just plot yourself on that, and then please again put that into the chat and then Janet and Matt will monitor that. So again, put into the chat where you are, as well as any other commentary that you think might be relevant to this. So let me give it a minute and let's see what we have in terms of responses. Again, plot yourself on this axis, on these axes where they are.
And a way to do that, like how do you express a position on this thing? You could do say like 4-3, and then we would know that that's kind of
Oh, yeah, yeah.
in between.
Thank you, Janet.
Oh, look, everybody already figured that out. What a smart group.
Yeah, see? All right. What are we seeing?
Oh, 5-5. Man, have we got some
Wow.
ideas for you.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, and for those of yourself, those who are finding yourselves in that top right-hand corner, you might find it a little bit more challenging to be productive and engaged with your team. Or with your colleagues, or if you're the leader, how do you do that? We're finding a lot of those who are 4s and 5s on both of those. We've been doing a ton of kind of what we call micro team buildings and just really helping people out a lot. And that's especially true for people on your team if they have different work location configurations. So we're also seeing situations where some people are considered essential and they have to come into the building. And some people are just coming in, again, what we talked about in terms of that opening poll. And then sometimes, remain working from home full time for a variety of reasons. And so there's lots of configurations here. What else are we seeing here, Janet and Matt?
Real variety: 3-3, 4-4, 5-5, 1-5, 1-3. It's a real variety.
Wow.
And then an observation from Lori about the 3 C's, the difference between cooperating, coordinating, and collaborating. First time I've worked for myself on my own, I'm loving it, and only forming teams as needed for particular projects.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it could be project specific too, your degree of interdependency, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And depending on where you sit on the spectrum here, you'll notice, and Stephanie will get into it, that there are certain problems. One of our participants noted that technology is a problem. That they've been experiencing a particular difficulty in coordinating, collaborating, and cooperating, perhaps because technology is an issue.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, great. This gives us it gives us a little bit of a sense. And so, so why is the hybrid the most complex? Why is it that this hybrid is the most complex? And part of that is a couple of reasons, and probably I'd love to hear which of these you think is most germane to you and your team and your situation. Something that we call proximity or remote worker bias have profound yet unconscious impact. So what we used to call remote worker bias is also proximity bias. Because so many people are remote that it's turned into a proximity bias where we're gravitating towards those who are located with us or who were located with us pre-COVID, and we tend to go to those folks. And what we are seeing actually from our experiences and some research is that proximity bias in COVID has morphed into something we call a temporal bias. And that is a bias towards people who are at or close to your time zones, especially in global environments. Home office members require more formal agreements and plans. And so if you're working in an office, it can be informal and you can know about it because you have opportunities to bump up against each other. And again, number 3, all people who are in the office can more easily find each other. So they have higher visibility to each other. And just as a little bit of a thought for people who have gone through our virtual leader or any of our workshops, we often talk about visibility as an absolute foundational piece to any kind of trust and team building, is that visibility to each other and presence. People located with the scene leaders sometimes have better access to information and to those people. So again, proximity bias is huge in this case, because if the leaders can't see what you're doing and they don't have a sense of what you're doing, then it's hard to kind of move up or feel like you can add value. Shared culture and access to information varies by location. And for folks who were with us last year when Janet and I did the webinar on on looking at culture and mindsets, which is the model I'll go over in a minute. But we talk about the artifacts and the elements of culture need to be portable and transportable. And that can vary. That also makes that hybrid more complex when culture varies from one location to the other. That foundation for decision making then also varies and can add to complexity. And then, of course, co-located people don't always recognize the need for formalization. They recognize the need that they're remote, but not what the solution is. And so what we talk about here then is what we call is this sort of the hybrid path. So as we're moving from that bottom left to the top right, what we need to do and what the strategy and plan is that you need to move from informal to formal so that everybody is on the same page. So what you have is formal agreements, processes, reliable technologies, which is certainly, I know we heard that in the beginning, that's been an issue. And so we have to have that. And for the people who are in the 5s and even 4-4 up there, without those agreed upon processes, so conflict resolution, the structures, the checklists, the agreements, all the pieces that sort of formalize and we have an understanding, they can't survive and they can't be productive and add value as easily in that. And so in the center of this, we place it in the center just because it looks prettier that way. But in your team, it may be that wherever your dot was, that's where your little hybrid would be. And so it may seem strange, but in hybrid virtual teams where, again, some are remote, some are in person, it demonstrates that need. And so they have those varied needs for formalization. And so again, we have found that our research and experience find that that's especially true if the leader is closer to the bottom left part of the graph. If the leader doesn't have that sense or your leadership. So we worked with an HR strategy team and the CHRO basically was talking about how the senior leadership team was in that bottom left-hand corner, which made it really hard for them to understand the impetus for rolling out some of those strategies. And so again, what alleviates some of the challenges is making things explicit. And so, so again, those people who are on the right, they need that more. And if those things are not formalized, the consequence is people don't feel like they are onboarded. It takes longer to onboard them. It takes longer to engage. They often have higher attrition, which we're actually hearing. Love to hear other people's thoughts on this, but hearing, well, it's okay because there are so many people unemployed. It's okay if they leave.
Oh,
and so,
no, no,
yes,
it's not.
yes,
No, it's not.
I know, but we hear that so much. And so we need those explicit team architectures. So in more hybrid situations, you really just need to operate differently. And the model by which we use for that is what we
Stephanie,
call.
one sec. We have one request to scoot back one slide just for a moment here. Anne, does that help? Just to have a look at what some of this complexity is.
Okay, she raised her hand. Do you have access to the chat to allow her to talk? Unmute, Janet?
Pardon me? Is she?
Hang on a second. Ann Fogarty raised her hand, so let me.
Okay. All right. Let me.
If you go to participate.
Here we go.
You can let her unmute and ask the question.
I'm not seeing where to do that, Stephanie.
Okay.
I'm not seeing how to unmute her.
Let's see.
That's okay, because Anne can't speak anyway. She doesn't have a mic.
Oh, okay. Okay, is it in the chat? You want to put your question in the chat, Ann, and then we can come back to it? Okay. So
I see. Yeah, and the VPN, I have no microphone. Okay. Lovely tech challenges of working in HIPAA. Got it. Okay, she's fine. So we can proceed.
Excellent. Okay, great. So here we have the hybrid model again, and that 45-degree arrow going from informal to formal is in essence the pathway. It's the strategy to be able to make hybrid work and allow everybody to add value or increase the likelihood they can add value regardless of location. So here we have what we call our organizational performance model. And actually, some of the folks on here who used to work for Bridging Distance were part of the research on this model. And for this becomes the foundation for our strategy. And so what we start with is this idea of mindsets in the center, right? So what's my mindset? So it's this established set of attitudes and the resulting behaviors that reflect beliefs about virtual work. So these attitudes are something we're seeing a ton of shift in as people have had to work remotely. And all of a sudden, some of the attitudes about remote work and people's ability to be productive and add value, and they're not just eating bonbons and doing laundry and, doing other things at home, but they're actually productive. And the thing that we assess here, so we have an online assessment as well as looking, so you can do this in your company, and then get some benchmarks on it. But what we look at here is awareness and habits. So I might know what the right thing is. It's a question of, does that translate into my behaviors and habits? So for example, I might go out and go out to eat, or pre-COVID or post-vaccine, go out to eat. And I go and I say, oh my gosh, I haven't eaten well this week. I'm gonna have a salad and I'm gonna have a seltzer. And I get to the restaurant, and don't they have lobster mac and cheese, which is my absolute favorite, and my favorite red wine. So my awareness of what the right thing to do is to get the salad and the seltzer. But my habit says I'm going to get the lobster mac and just one glass though of the red wine, right? And so what we want to do is make sure that whatever work we do, and I'm vigilant about this at Bridging Distance, that all of our work translates from some kind of something in behavioral, that at the end you can do more or do less. So again, mindsets. So I know that people are remote, but does that translate into habits where I make sure that they feel included and engaged, and I'm communicating all the information? Again, in hybrid, the tendency is just to do it here, or even pre-COVID, we'd forget to call the people who were remote, all kinds of stories. The second dimension is what we call structures. And the structures are looking at policies and processes and procedures, right? So this is the architecture of the organization, but also the architecture that HR usually, as part of the strategy, rolls out in terms of team-based performance. So virtual team checklists, the ways in which you're going to do it, team buildings, all those pieces. And we talk about this in terms of formal, so those formal structures, and then informal structures. And what's interesting is, in all of these dimensions, when we did the analysis and in essence the validation, the statistical stuff that I won't bore you with, but we found that the informal didn't hold up in terms of statistically, which makes perfect sense, because if it did, then it would be in the formal category. And informal, we're talking about pockets of the organization that can be successful, very often related to who the leader is or who is in charge or other circumstantial situations. So again, those structures become really important. And on that strategy, when you formalize those and often co-create them, it makes a tremendous difference.
And Stephanie, too, when you look at these structures, these processes, they are informed by the mindset, by the culture, particularly the informal ones, which show up as habits and kind of behaviors that a culture becomes known for. How playful are they? How precise are they? How so, and the more coherent your culture is in certain instances, the less explicit you need to be. If you have a really coherent culture where people understand, have a shared expectation of what good looks like, and their values are really clear and present, you need to legislate a little bit less. But if you're a 4-4 or a 5-5, you need all of this working together. So as she completes this model, you'll see how each one informs the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was interesting because we just revalidated this in 2018. So it was the third iteration of it. This model is more than 10 years old at this point, but we keep revalidating and making updates, and it still holds up. So the third one is technology, and that's often what people go to as the solution to virtual work and remote work, is that we just need to have the right technology and then everything will be fine. That's part of the tools, right? But people still have to be motivated to engage with the team. They have to know how to use the tools. They have to want to use the tools. So they have to make sure they have their chat on, or the ways in which they find each other. And so they have to be motivated to be engaged. And that's where the structures feed into the mindset that Janet was just talking about in terms of culture. And we look at this in terms of two areas. One is the actual equipment, so the tools themselves, but also the supports and the support structures that are in place. So help desks, years ago, a lot of help desks thought they were doing great because they were maybe headquartered on the East Coast. So they would start at 8 a.m. and go to 6, and that was their way of expanding. But if you're traveling to Europe or you're going to Japan or Hong Kong, you're trying to log in from your hotel, you have no help. And so again, what are the supports for that remote work? And we found it again and again in terms of technologies. And what we found also in COVID, when talking about this model, is that companies were monitoring performance using technology. And they wanted to know how long people were on their computers and how often did they move the mouse or whatever it is. It's all kinds of different ways. So again, thinking about what is the role of technology as a leg in this stool, a piece of this model, but not the solution. And it's not the way to monitor that. And then the last piece of it is what I think is probably the simplest to think about, and that is competencies, right? So do we have the necessary skills and abilities? So by skills, we think about that as something that's very, very teachable, and an ability is an innate kind of sense that we want to nurture. So skills and abilities would be, let's go to the virtual leader workshop, or let's go to an electronic body language workshop, or remote worker boot camp, so we can learn those skills. But in also what we're doing is looking at those mindsets. So mindsets is kind of the antidote to and the ways in which we nurture those critical abilities in terms of that. So Janet and Matt, any comments? Or
Yeah, we have a couple of really interesting observations and requests, Stephanie, for you to help us understand. One person said the size of the organization, how does that fit into how you would apply this model?
So I think in a smaller organization, they could get away with a little bit more informal. So I think about it sort of as a family size organization, maybe a couple hundred people where people really know each other. Maybe they don't have to do that. But a lot of this is in terms of thinking about how much distance do you have to overcome in order to be successful. And on our website, and we're actually rolling out a new survey where you can assess how much distance you have to overcome. So if you have a lot of interpersonal distance, which means a lot of differences in terms of genders and diversity, which is wonderful, but it makes it more challenging. Or organizational distance, where you have a large company, 50,000, 100,000 people, and so there's a lot of complexities. What we find in those cases is if people are going to use this model, then you want to think about it in terms of the way in which the organization's broken down. And use it that way around this how some of the policies and structures would be unique to a particular, like you might have research and development might really be different than manufacturing and quality because they'd have different aspects to it. I'm not sure that answers it, but feel free, whoever's question it was, I'm happy to spend time on this. Offline, reach out to me, happy to set up some time to talk it through and see how we might support you and how I can answer those questions.
And Stephanie, here's another one. What can we do about all those informal serendipity moments that we miss? How can we, it sounds like an oxymoron, but how can we engineer some serendipity,
So you can do small things like formalizing those ad hoc interpersonal interactions. So the before and after the meeting, we missed that kind of chat. So hey, Max played soccer with somebody here, or how's it going? How did the game go? Or what's going on with college acceptances, or how was your bike ride? Those kinds of things. But you can formalize those in a meeting. And one of the things that we have always encouraged is that when you have virtual teams and virtual meetings, meetings have to take on, and interactions have to take on a dual purpose, right? In a traditional virtual team, or that your meeting would be, okay, let's go through the agenda and then we're done, because you have other opportunities to interact. But when you have fewer touch points with people and opportunities to interact, those interactions have to have the dual purpose of both moving the agenda and the team forward on goals, but also really drilling down in terms of those relationships and the trust building. We have a blog on our website that talks about the types of trusts. So for people who haven't heard us talk about that or been through any of our sessions before, that's kind of interesting and helps in terms of thinking that through. But again, things like a check-in question in the meetings. And when I do this with engineers and scientists and I ask them to tell me, bring their favorite mug to the meeting or, their favorite vacation spot, I can feel the eyes roll around the world. And I know they're going, oh my gosh, this is so hokey, but it works. And it takes 5 minutes, for a team of 10, 5 minutes, right? And you have to prepare them, like especially the engineers and the scientists, you have to tell them what you're going to ask them because otherwise they get stressed, maybe. So again, those kinds of, again, the dual purpose of virtual meetings has to be both to accomplish the agenda and to deepen the interactions and deepen the relationships with people. And that's where some of the chats and some of those fast asynchronous communications can really help with that. Hopefully that answers the question.
And there's another idea around having a virtual show and tell that's been really successful just because of what people chose to share. I mean, one thing that has been nice about some of this, as you were saying at the beginning, Stephanie, is just the humanity of learning about each other as things parade back and forth behind us.
Yep.
And then a few companies I've heard are using some technology to kind of do a coffee shuffle, and they're using like a little app that just randomly introduces people as though you bumped into them while you're waiting for your burrito. And so that you meet people that you would never probably have met in your
Yep.
regular
Yep.
meetings. So there's that
Good.
I think. Yep. And then I have one more. I have one more from who was it? It's someone, Lori, I think. No, Dee. Anyhow, what to do about mixed presence meetings, Stephanie, where you have some people sitting in a conference room and others are in their little Zoom boxes?
You act as if everybody's remote. When you have one person who's not in the room with you, you treat it like a full virtual meeting. And so we have some guidelines. Happy to spend some time with whoever that question was afterwards, and we can stay on and give some suggestions, but you always act as if everybody's remote because then you're taking that person into account. So, and for other questions, we can take time in the end. I want to make sure that we're honoring our commitment to end. And so Janet, do you want to take over from here?
Yeah, and this really gets to kind of the third factor that Stephanie was introducing in the beginning, where we have location complexity, we have this interdependency factor, and now there's this leadership expectation. Leadership expectation has obviously always been a thing. But now how it used to be with in-person, and it's all about assumptions and perceptions. When we're all physically together, you can see if somebody's at their desk and you're assuming they're working, which might be wildly incorrect, by the way. But, it makes everybody feel comfortable that people are in the office, therefore they're working. So the perception of work performance it shifts to actually what is the evidence of the work itself, to the deliverables, the outcomes, the results. So that has been, people are seeing that productivity is fine, if not better, in many measures, despite their worst expectations. So shifting from, this perception that people are working to actual, evidence and results, sticking with a really static schedule versus getting the work done when you can and when you're available. This notion of monitoring computer use is kind of like the physical sitting at your desk. It's not a great proxy for actual productivity and outcomes. And I don't, well, we won't go down that. I just find that really not great. Formal evaluation feedback, and this was happening even before pandemic, is a shift from these loathsome, terrible performance review events that feel very punitive to a kind of constant real-time check-ins, a more coaching orientation where you're really, it's more of a habit, a check-in part of life. And again, a more frequent bite-sized cadence around assignments of work, because things are changing really fast too, faster than ever before. So, and then in the spirit of the team checkups, baking this into your agendas and having tools that help people keep track of things. So that you are building more trust at the same time as you have more evidence of work getting done. So these are some of the shifts that are happening around expectations.
Okay, great. And what we're seeing is that it's really much more dynamic and iterative, really. So,
Absolutely. Yes.
okay.
Steph and Janet, Kim came up with a great question, which we've all, or many of us have already experienced. She's asking, is there any advice on how to move leadership past the idea that everyone needs to be in the office and in order to be productive? I know that Stephanie, you and I have talked about a particular client in the Houston area that, or at least I recall it being in the Houston area where you've run into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we can talk about that. I'm happy to shift because I'd have some questions. But in essence, it's really about defining what is the purpose for people to be in the office. The fundamental issue is, what does it get for them to be there? And very often, if you drill down, it has to do with a leadership mindset around a perception, that first part of that table around perception of performance. But we can drill down that really in terms of what that looks like.
And I can say too, data really helps on this point, and data in two different ways. Looking at the work, the work, is the work getting done? And usually there are ways to know that. The other thing is ask people how productive they feel, how productive their people are, because the top leader is often disconnected and he's got all this support. So, asking people, they will respond, I think, very, very accurately. And I'm seeing a lot of needles getting moved that way, and leaders being very pleasantly surprised.
Great. Okay, so we have about 2 minutes left, and then we can take lots more questions. But I did want to, do you want to kind of review this, Janet?
Sure. So what do we do? And forgive me, I was thinking we were going to the bottom of the hour. So there are actions to take here. That's the good news. Lots of ways to understand what's going to work, what you're trying to solve, and actually the way Bridging Distance goes about this is to co-create a strategy with the HR team or the business unit, the team leader, whoever it is that's trying to solve, who has noticed something that they think can be better. Training makes a huge difference, and training, the first tenet of great training is, why do we need to learn this? What are we trying to solve through the training? And I think today you've heard some of that. And give people very practical takeaways. Give them tools. Give them a toolkit. What are actual widgets that they can use to make life easier, and that are a shared understanding of how we can do things. Really do some team building, some coaching. There are tried and true methods that work here. And sometimes it's instituting some informal kinds of sessions where people can just kind of share what's going on, and really tap into the observations, the feedback, the ideas that people have. So much good has come from this chaos as we're trying to solve things. So let's engineer those opportunities.
Yep. Okay. And then you want to do this, and then I'll take over?
Sure, yeah. And if you do these, I think we're all in this. This group has already demonstrated that they actually really care about these things, or that they're seeing things that bug them, or they're seeing things that are really cool hacks on new ways to do things. So you will increase your competency organization-wide, starting with your team, or it might expand into the whole organization. You'll compress the time for understanding what works, because this is tried and true. It reduces stress, which is a huge factor. I'm seeing that because the fatigue is adding up right now. This has been a long time. So stress and wellness are huge factors. Building capability with resources that are there when you need them. Reducing the biases. There's a whole new slew of biases. Just when we thought we had enough, wait, there's more.
Yeah.
So, and, really using disciplined techniques that are rooted in science really saves you time and makes things work better.
Yeah, and all of our work is in that. And as we're moving into the options here, just in terms of reducing stress, we had a reach out many, many months ago by a senior vice president, head of global operations in a pharmaceutical. And he started the conversation by saying, Stephanie, I'm worried about the emotional health of my employees. And I was like, stop right there. I want to work with you. And so we actually rolled out a lot of this strategy and ways in which he could get his team to reduce that and to kind of to be able to, through the training, through a lot of coaching, through a lot of team building, and really just formalizing things so people could all be on the same page. There's already going to be stress there. And if the things that you have control over that are stressful, you can reduce those, you really can get a lot. So a couple of ways in which we can provide resources too. We send out we do blogs, and so what we call that is through the distance lens, because our distance lens is really a diagnostic for how much complexity you have to overcome. And we send those out with tips and blogs just a couple times a month. They're also on our website. We have recordings of some of our webinars, as well as policies, checklists, toolkits. We are starting a brand new, what we call coffee talks, around looking at the parallels, so belonging and remote inclusion. So looking at this whole idea of DEI and the parallels to engaging remote folks. So I when I did my master's thesis in '96, found a lot of parallels to what we called telecommuters at the time and oppression theory. So we're going to be exploring that in small groups once a month for a period of months. Lots of other supports. We have public sessions up that you can join. And then we're doing virtual leadership, ongoing virtual leadership, informal water cooler conversations that people can join. So again, an opportunity for questions and thoughts here. For those, I know we're a couple minutes past our time, but if you need to jump off, thank you for attending. Thank you for your questions and your insights. But we will stay on and feel free to put in questions or raise your hand and ask to unmute, and we can actually have dialogues. So thanks again. And here is our contact information, how you can reach me. I'm also on LinkedIn, and you can find us on the Bridging Distance website. So, so thank you. And again, as we do this, so thank you. And for those who need to jump off, have a great day and rest of the week, depending on where you're coming from. And let's go back to questions and answers here. Any other questions or comments or insights, feedback, random thoughts? Applause.
Yeah, no, we've gotten, people are like, thank you for the information.
Yeah.
Good places to start conversation, asking questions.
I'm going to
tell you that if it's an indicator, we were a little bit over 50, in the mid 50s when we started this particular workshop, and all the way through until almost the very end, and even past there, we were in the high 40s. So if that's an indication, and given the comments on the chat, it appears that this was not only something people participated in, but found value in having stayed for the entire time.
Mm-hmm. Lori Sherman raised her hand, but I think she's gone, so I don't see her. Oh, there she is. Hi, Lori. Let me allow to talk.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions coming in.
Oh, that's great. Hey.
Hi.
Hey,
Nice.
team.
Hey.
I need to jump off in a minute, but it's more just thinking about how you engage introverts in remote teams, because a lot of the team building stuff that we talked about, those of us who are extroverted, we jump right in. And for the introverts, I know it's so much more painful and more difficult, whether it's small group discussions or bring your favorite mug or you name it.
Yeah, so what we do actually, when we do sort of micro team buildings, and we did a ton of this, particularly early on in COVID, and we keep rechecking with those teams. The team building doesn't have to be, funny. And, like in the old days, team building was, jumping out of trees or shooting paintballs at each other. Team building can also be co-creating agreements and talking about how to do that in structured places. But the best thing you can do for an introvert is also to tell them ahead of time what the expectation is in terms of engagement, and then allow some of it to be done in asynchronous ways, or in, ways in which, like using a chat as opposed to having to have a discussion. And then I think sticking to an agenda and really structuring things to make it predictable. And so some of it might be that you're also sharing, experiences and things with each other ahead of time. So we often will have people create a slide that's sort of telling about you, and then we just have everybody, post it up, and there's no talking. It's like a slideshow, and we put on music, and you're not allowed to talk. Which the hardest part of that is getting the extroverts to not talk.
Yeah. And I'll just say before I jump off that or before I give space for other people to talk, is my favorite one I've seen is Jeopardy. When people create a Jeopardy game about that company or organization, and then people go off into groups, I've seen that be very intriguing for the introverts.
Yep, but some of that too is, so you're doing that, and then you go on, you do like so the old scavenger hunts. We do team building as scavenger hunts, and so they move into a breakout room, and then someone searches the internet for Brad Pitt's middle name, or I don't even know what it is, but I mean there's just different kinds of things that you might want to find. So all of those are also really helpful because it gets people to know each other without having to bare their souls. So really great questions, feedback, and thank you, Lori, for that. Others, again, raise your hand or put in the chat if you want to have a question or ask to unmute. Or are there questions in the chat?
Go ahead, Jen.
No, go ahead. I'm just scrolling right now.
I mean, people are participating still. We, Kim, Joanne, and others are making comments like, why bother to go in the office? My words, not theirs. When people in the office are doing video chats to begin with, that might be a reasonable data point to make if there was a way to determine who's in the office and how are they interacting. I know that my brother, for example, goes into the office. He locks himself into an office because he's not yet comfortable interacting with people in the office except through a closed door or at a distance. And what is the real value of being there in that case? Go ahead.
No, because I think some of it is what we hear is, and then we're actually doing a lot of what we're called innovating digitally. And then we have a new course that we're rolling out calling influencing digitally. And so some of that, the assumption on innovation and even influence to an extent, is that you have, that you need to have those informal times before and after meetings, bumping each other in the hall and all of that. And so what we talk about is the ability in terms of innovation. When you look at the real aspects of innovation, informal is just the pathway to it, but it's not some of the reasons why innovation happens or doesn't. I think it's the opportunity that you have to formalize. So again, if you're an organization or a team that really relies on innovation, which is very often the case in particularly United States-based teams, where innovation is sometimes what is our key competency. It's the American innovation is sometimes the key competency of the U.S. And so how do you make sure that still is able to happen? And so actually, Joanne Durr is on the call, and she and I were doing some stuff with a client that she asked me to help out with, and we had a really good time. But some of that focus was on innovation and the ways in which that could translate in COVID, and would people even ever come back? And so there are those pieces to it. And I also did want to address, I think the question was around when leadership says you have to come in, and some of those questions, that comes down to the mindset that says people have to come in because otherwise we don't know. And so when you mandate, we did this with a client who was just insistent on mandating that people come back. And then finally, after much head bashing and all kinds of things, got them to a place where they were able to label what was the purpose of people coming in. And it was a conversation after conversation after conversation with a wonderful HR person who was, God bless him, he hung right in there. And And finally, getting leadership, senior leadership, to identify what was the purpose, what were their hopes, what did they want, and what did they fear. And that's really hard to do, especially when you're talking about, really busy senior people who are, technical in some way. So what other questions or comments do we have, folks?
There's an idea for a whole workshop, Stephanie, which is a session specifically demonstrating interactive games and exercises and activities that build relationships in remote workplace.
Mm-hmm.
How do you kind of bring people together? Some of it is, and the other thing, Stephanie, along with that, I think, is really training managers to be good facilitators in this kind of environment. To Joanne's point earlier, limit the extroverts to limit everybody to 2 minutes, no more than 2 minutes. It takes skill and courage to manage those kinds of meetings this way. Imagine the introvert leading a meeting that has a bunch of extroverts in it. So how do we skill them up to operate well in this environment?
Mm-hmm. I use my phone, and when it's about to ring, I hold it right up to the mic, so everybody knows time's up.
That's certainly a good way to make it clear. Some of the comments that are in here speak to things that we haven't gotten into, but it relate to diversity and inclusion. People wanting to go in the office because they can't function with the kids and the dogs running around, and begging to go into the office, but also there are implications for whether you require people to go in the office from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. We may find that people who are in the city or closer to the city, that we need to adjust our benefits to have some kind of policy, because they can't use or have to use public transportation, and that may be open or maybe not be open, and that has implications for people coming in and out of work as well.
Yeah, great point. Great point.
I think that in the early days, when it started to sound safe to come back in, and some leaders who were doubting that work was actually getting done, and they sort of forced people to come back, have paid the price for that in terms of disengagement, if not illness. So, I have a client who, people immediately got sick. I'm not saying that happens all the time, but it was a rush to, and Matt, Joanne, you all, I'm not even sure if it's legal to require people. Is it? It might be if you want to keep your job. Yes, it's your choice. If you want to keep your job, you come in. I forcing people to do things is not usually a great strategy unless there's a really clear compliance reason.
Yeah, which is part of what we do, and I was talking about that example earlier around really drilling down and having HR help and whoever else can help in terms of really having those leaders understand their own mindsets. And some of what we did with that was actually used questions from the virtual organizational performance model. So that's an online assessment that we have, and we were able to pull out questions from that sparked conversations with some of those senior leaders to get them to really think about things. So, other questions or comments or thoughts? Again, feel free to either chat it or ask to unmute. Okay. Okay. All right. So, thank you all, Janet, Matt, if you want to check out as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining. It's always a pleasure. Thanks for hanging in there with us. Hopefully this was valuable. Again, we have public sessions coming up. So if some of the skills or conversations or, sign up for our tips, feel free to reach out and connect with us, and, keep sharing your stories, because we only get smarter together.
Absolutely.
Yes. And let me one plug. We're doing our research on Deb Perali's on, and she's part of our research team. We are redoing last year, before COVID. We did looking at the impact of digital isolation and loneliness on workplace productivity. And actually, Nicole, who was on, I think she's not now. We're redoing that research in March and April. So reach out if you're interested in joining one of those roundtables to look at what's changed in a year from our initial data. So again,
Lots to come.
Yep. Thank you, Matthew and Janet, for your support. As always, it's always fun to work together. And everybody have a great rest of the day and week. And again, reach out, keep us posted, keep talking with us. Love to hear what's happening and let us know if we can support you. And thanks for your time.
Great. Thanks, everybody.